My name is John Andrew Ramsey, JonBenét's half-brother. JonBenét would go around and ask everybody how their day was and what they did, and he was just an energetic and fun kid. I think it starts with the video of JonBenét.
The case of JonBenét Ramsey involves a 6-year-old girl discovered under troubling circumstances at home. A peculiar ransom note was found, but no one ever called to collect. Reports indicated no signs of forced entry, and initial forensic analysis did not immediately identify DNA from an unknown source. The only individuals known to be home were the family, including her 9-year-old brother, Burke Ramsey, who was reportedly the last person to see JonBenét alive. His fingerprints were noted on a bowl of pineapple. A knife belonging to him was reportedly found near the scene, and a voice, which some experts have suggested could be his, was reportedly heard at the end of the 911 call. However, in a 2024 docuseries on the case, Burke is barely mentioned. This has led to public discussion about why a key figure was not examined in greater depth and what the full narrative of events on that night in December 1996 truly entails. Before we analyze the suspicions in the case, please tell me where you saw this video from. I will read it all and spread it to the world. In November 2024, a true crime docuseries directed by filmmaker Joe Berlinger was released, promising a deep re-examination of the case. The series, consisting of 3 episodes, aimed to correct what it presented as past investigative mistakes, scrutinize the handling of the scene, and highlight how media attention may have shaped public perception. The director made it clear from the beginning that he did not believe the Ramsey family was responsible. Instead, he emphasized the need to use advanced forensic DNA tools to identify the responsible party and clear the family's name. The most discussed aspect of the series was its limited focus on Burke Ramsey, the only other child in the house that night. Despite being the last known person to see JonBenét alive, his name is referenced only briefly, without detailed analysis of his statements or the physical evidence connected to him. For a series that claimed to investigate the case from multiple angles, this was a notable omission. For starters, the 911 call made by Patsy Ramsey has long been subject to analysis. Enhanced audio has suggested the presence of a third voice at the end of the call, which many experts believe could be Burke's. If true, this detail would be inconsistent with the parents' statements that Burke was asleep during the initial discovery. Then there is the bowl of pineapple found on the kitchen table, which reportedly had Burke's fingerprints on it. Forensic reports also indicated that pineapple was found partially digested in JonBenét's stomach. This detail has led investigators to theorize about a possible late-night interaction. More debated is a red Swiss Army knife belonging to Burke. The housekeeper, Linda Hoffman Pugh, stated she had previously hidden it due to general safety concerns. That same knife was later found near where JonBenét was discovered. An official explanation for its presence at the scene has not been provided. Equally significant are reports from the time concerning Burke's behavior. Documents from the investigation describe accounts of him smearing waste materials on walls and candy boxes, showing signs of emotional detachment, and displaying unusual reactions during interviews. None of this context is explored in the series. Nor does the series mention the defamation lawsuits filed by the Ramsey family against media outlets and experts who publicly suggested Burke's potential involvement. CBS, which produced a 2016 docuseries that explored a theory involving Burke, was sued by him, with the lawsuit ending in a confidential settlement. This outcome highlighted the potential legal challenges for those scrutinizing this particular angle of the case. Notably absent from the series are experts like Dr. Werner Spitz, FBI profiler James R.R. Fitzgerald, behavioral analyst Laura Richards, and forensic scientist Dr. Henry Lee, all of whom have, at different times, raised questions about the evidence related to Burke. Instead, the production centers its narrative on an unidentified intruder theory and paints the family as victims of a media frenzy. This editorial decision appears to be a deliberate choice, one possibly driven by legal caution. Ever since his 2016 television appearance on Dr. Phil, where his demeanor and responses drew significant public attention, public debate surrounding Burke has grown. His decisions to either speak publicly or remain private have been interpreted in various ways, and yet, the omission of his role in a major docuseries only fuels more questions. Why is a central figure in the case's timeline treated as a footnote? The presence of his fingerprints, his knife near the scene, and a voice on the 911 call are all part of the official case file. The filmmaker, Joe Berlinger, is known for championing those he believes are wrongly accused, but some critics have questioned whether this approach may have suppressed one of the most discussed angles of the case. Critics argue that the docuseries fails to present new evidence and leans heavily on examining the intruder theory rather than exploring other documented alternatives. Burke's near-total absence remains a point of contention. At a minimum, viewers might have expected a mention of the knife, a timeline involving the pineapple, and an analysis of the third voice on the 911 tape. These are not minor details. They are potential clues in the case. Burke Ramsey was the firstborn child of John and Patsy Ramsey, arriving 3 years before his younger sister, JonBenét. At 9 years old, Burke occupied a quiet, often separate space within the Ramsey household. The family lived in a large home where Burke's bedroom was located on the top floor, while JonBenét slept on the second floor, closer to the main living areas. This physical separation seemed to mirror the family dynamic. Unlike his sister, Burke avoided the spotlight. JonBenét was a child beauty pageant participant, receiving significant attention from her parents, especially her mother Patsy, who had once been a pageant participant herself. Patsy invested immense energy into JonBenét's competitions, and as a result, much of the household's focus revolved around her. Burke, by contrast, was often described as retreating to his world of video games and computers. Multiple reports and testimonials from those close to the family, including the housekeeper Linda Hoffman Pugh, paint Burke as a boy who spent much of his time in isolation. This was not just physical, but emotional. In an interview following the incident, he referred to his sister in a detached tone that was noted by interviewers. Psychological evaluations later described Burke as having challenges with socialization. This emotional presentation may have been a defense mechanism or a symptom of something deeper. What has raised further concern for investigators are documented patterns of troubling behavior that occurred before the incident. One of the most widely discussed was his recurrent scatological behavior. Multiple sources, including the housekeeper and investigative reports, stated that Burke had a history of this behavior, with incidents involving walls, bathroom surfaces, and even JonBenét's personal belongings. In one account, waste materials were reportedly found on a Christmas gift intended for JonBenét and on her bed. In child psychology, such behavior is often considered a sign of unresolved anger or a desire to assert control. Adding to this concern is a documented incident where an interaction with a golf club resulted in an injury to JonBenét's face, leaving a visible scar. The parents described it as an accident, but some forensic psychologists and investigators have viewed the incident as potential evidence of underlying aggression. The fact that this injury occurred in the months leading up to the main incident is considered significant by some analysts. Testimonies from the housekeeper and others also described him as a child who would sometimes lash out. Burke also had an interest in tools, owning a red Swiss Army knife used for whittling. The family housekeeper once found it necessary to hide the knife due to her own safety concerns. On the morning of December 26, 1996, between approximately 5:30 a.m. and 6 o'clock a.m., Patsy Ramsey reported discovering a ransom note in the family's home. She immediately called 911. During that call, and in the initial moments of the response, Burke Ramsey was reportedly still asleep in his bedroom on the upper floor. According to statements made by both John and Patsy Ramsey, Burke had slept through the night and was not awake at the time of the discovery. These documented behavioral patterns and pieces of physical evidence form a complex backdrop that investigators have had to consider when evaluating all potential scenarios of what occurred that night. According to the family's account, this decision was made to avoid causing him unnecessary distress. This meant Burke remained uninvolved during the first critical stages of the incident. When the Boulder police arrived at the Ramsey residence shortly before 6:10 a.m., Burke was not present in the main living spaces. Officers did not encounter him in the entryways, the kitchen, or the living room. Instead, he remained upstairs, separated from the center of activity and shielded from the ongoing police work. It was reported that he was given breakfast and occupied with his toys during this time. Burke was not questioned that morning by responding officers. There was no direct inquiry made to him about the night before, nor was he asked if he had seen or heard anything unusual. He was not included in any part of the search or early response efforts. As the search for JonBenét continued, Burke stayed isolated. When Detective Linda Arndt later requested John Ramsey and family friend Fleet White to search the house once again, Burke was not involved. He was not present when John and Fleet went into the basement and discovered JonBenét under troubling circumstances. Throughout this period, Burke remained away from the core areas of investigation. The timeline from the 911 call to the discovery spans several hours. In that entire stretch, Burke's role remained minimal. His presence kept away from officers, search teams, and family discussions. This sequence of events marks a period during which Burke Ramsey was physically present in the house, but notably absent from every active response tied to his sister's reported disappearance. One of the first notable observations came from Fleet White, a close friend of John Ramsey and a key figure that morning. White was the person who encouraged John to search the basement, a decision that led to the discovery. However, in his recounting of the morning's events, Fleet never once mentioned Burke. For someone physically present in the house, this omission raised early questions among observers about whether Burke was being intentionally kept separate. That morning, Burke was reportedly given breakfast by another family friend, which took place not long after the police arrived. While seemingly benign, the timing of this action, removing Burke from the environment and tending to him separately, was noted by some as part of a deliberate effort to control his exposure. At a time when officers were working to understand a potential abduction, isolating the only other child in the house was seen by some as an unusual choice. Further complicating the timeline were Patsy Ramsey's shifting accounts. In some interviews, Patsy claimed that Burke was never awakened and knew nothing of the events. Yet in other interviews, she recounted Burke asking, "What's going on?" This inconsistency suggests that Burke may have been aware of more than was initially acknowledged, leading to questions about whether he was awake during the 911 call. These questions are often paired with forensic audio analysis of that call. In the final seconds, a brief audio snippet revealed what many experts believed to be three voices: Patsy, John, and a child. Patsy is reportedly heard saying something followed by John's voice. A faint child's voice is also audible. According to researcher James Kohler, author of Foreign Faction, internal reports suggested that the FBI deemed it highly probable that the child's voice was Burke's, though this has never been officially confirmed or released publicly. The implication is significant. If Burke was speaking after the call ended, he would have been awake and within earshot, which would be inconsistent with his family's claims. Furthermore, Burke was not formally interviewed by police during the first 48 hours following the incident. He was later questioned in a controlled setting, accompanied by attorneys and child psychologists hired by the Ramseys. For law enforcement, this was a departure from standard procedure, as in most missing child cases, every person in the home would be quickly and independently questioned. The explanation offered by the Ramseys was that they were trying to protect their son, but some investigators felt the degree of control exerted over his environment and interactions suggested a high level of coordination. The idea that Burke slept through the entire morning has also been questioned by experts. The Ramsey home was large but not soundproof. A 911 call was made, and there were raised voices and movement. Many have found it difficult to believe a 9-year-old would remain asleep or unaware through it all. This detail is important because Burke's state of awareness influences the timeline of events. This physical and emotional separation coincides with several observations about the parents' actions that same morning. Patsy Ramsey claimed to have discovered the ransom note at approximately 5:30 a.m. and called 911 within minutes. Investigators later remarked that when they arrived, she appeared fully dressed, and that her level of composure was unusual for a parent who had just discovered their daughter was missing. Similarly, John Ramsey's actions came under scrutiny. While instructed to search the home earlier in the day, he did not do so until several hours later, when Fleet White urged him to check the basement. It was there that JonBenét was discovered. His subsequent decision to move her from the location resulted in actions that complicated later forensic review. The broader picture painted a scene of unusual organization. Patsy placed the 911 call, John later made the discovery in the basement, and Burke was kept away from the activity. To many investigators, this level of coordination appeared more like a staged event than a spontaneous family emergency. Moreover, officers at the scene reported that the Ramseys showed remarkably composed behavior. For some, this pointed to a family trying to stay in control of the situation. Around 1:00 p.m., on December 26, 1996, JonBenét Ramsey was discovered in the basement of the family home. Several pieces of physical evidence found at the scene have been connected to Burke. One of the most scrutinized is the bowl of pineapple on the kitchen table. The bowl contained pineapple and milk, and Burke's fingerprints were found on it. Medical examination results showed that JonBenét had undigested pineapple in her system, strongly suggesting she had eaten it shortly before the critical incident. The conclusion drawn by investigators was that Burke and JonBenét may have been in the kitchen together eating a late-night snack. If true, this could place Burke as the last person to see his sister. Complicating this further is Burke's own account, which maintained he had been asleep. But the pineapple evidence tells a different story. Combined with the analysis of the 911 call, it suggests he may have been awake and aware during some of the most critical moments. Moving on to the basement where JonBenét was discovered, investigators noted other unsettling signs. According to multiple sources and former detectives, traces of fecal matter were found in the area. Given Burke's documented history of scatological behavior, the discovery of such material in the basement is considered by some to be a potentially illuminating detail, although no direct forensic link was made between Burke and that specific evidence. The circumstantial overlap, when considered alongside the pineapple and a pocket knife, is hard to ignore. The pocket knife, small, red, and used by Burke for whittling, was found on the floor near the scene. The family's housekeeper, Linda Hoffman Pugh, had previously hidden the knife due to concerns about Burke's reported preoccupation with it. That it reappeared in the basement, in the same area as the discovery, is a fact that has never been fully explained. Authorities have not suggested the knife was used in the primary incident, but its presence in a location of critical interest to the investigation created further questions. Then there is the flashlight, a black mag light found in the house that many experts believe could have been consistent with the major injury noted in the medical examiner's report. The size, weight, and blunt surface of this flashlight matched the description of the injury. The item was reportedly wiped clean of fingerprints, suggesting a deliberate effort to remove evidence. While there is no proof that Burke handled it, the flashlight was found in an area he had access to. Lastly, analysis of the scene noted 2 small circular abrasions on JonBenét, which would come to fuel one of the more debated theories in the case. These marks, located on her lower back and near her neck, were initially theorized by some investigators to have been caused by a stun gun. This interpretation supported the idea of an intruder, a theory advanced by certain law enforcement officials who believed an outsider used such a device to subdue JonBenét. However, this stun gun theory was questioned under closer scrutiny. Forensic pathologists like Dr. Werner Spitz and former investigator James Kohler pointed out that the marks showed no signs of electrical burns or tissue damage, which are key indicators of stun gun use. Instead, the marks were described as clean, consistent in diameter, and matching the spacing between the metal prongs of a toy train track. This shift in analysis brought attention to a metal train set belonging to Burke Ramsey. The toy train, commonly played with by Burke in the basement where JonBenét was eventually discovered, had track pieces whose metal rails aligned with the dimensions of the abrasions. Investigators who examined the tracks found the width between the 2 rails closely matched the distance between the marks. A theory developed that the injuries may have been inflicted by someone pressing the end of the toy track against JonBenét's skin. This raised further questions about whether someone was trying to determine if she was responsive. A 2024 docuseries on the case notably excludes any mention of this toy train track evidence, despite its potential forensic significance. The series avoids this line of inquiry, mirroring its overall tendency to downplay elements that could point toward family involvement. Adding to the complexity is the lack of visible emotional reaction from Burke reported at the time. There are no photos, videos, or eyewitness testimonies describing him crying, asking questions, or reacting to the passing of his sister. No teacher, neighbor, or family member ever reported Burke expressing sorrow, confusion, or trauma. In most cases involving the passing of a sibling, even very young children show clear emotional distress. That Burke reportedly did not, or that no one documented it, has remained a noticeable gap in the narrative. Even more curiously, Burke was absent from public events surrounding JonBenét's passing. He did not attend public memorial services, was not seen at the funeral, and was not included in any media appearances by the family. While one could argue this was done to protect him, it also reinforces the perception that he was being kept out of the spotlight. This isolation extended to psychological care. Burke did not receive any immediate professional counseling. It wasn't until days later, under the coordination of family attorneys, that any professional support was introduced. This delay is significant, as in cases involving children, psychological assessments are often critical in understanding family dynamics and trauma reactions. All records of Burke's behavior from this time forward were managed exclusively by the Ramsey legal team. No police psychologist, school counselor, or social worker was allowed to independently evaluate him. The tight control over access and narrative has led many to believe the family was intentionally shielding Burke from scrutiny. Moreover, there are no reports of him keeping any mementos of JonBenét. No favorite toy of hers, no shared photos. There are also no accounts of Patsy or John physically comforting Burke or any documented moments of shared grief. An informal note written by an officer present in the house observed that Burke, even after reportedly being told of his sister's passing, showed no outward signs of emotion. While this is not definitive evidence, it is not the typical behavior described in a 9-year-old in such a situation. What makes all of these pieces notable is how they add up when viewed together. Burke's fingerprints on the bowl, the undigested pineapple, the reported lack of emotional reaction, the knife in the basement, the flashlight with no prints, the prior behavioral issues, and the legal shielding. No one element alone is conclusive, but collectively, they construct a pattern of details that suggests more occurred that night than has ever been officially acknowledged. It is also worth considering that none of this was fully confronted in many high-profile media analyses, including the 2024 docuseries. The silence, both emotional and investigative, around Burke Ramsey is perhaps one of the most discussed aspects of the case. In the immediate aftermath of the incident from December 27th to December 31st, 1996, no formal interviews were conducted with Burke. The Ramsey family, acting on legal advice, did not make Burke available to police. Law enforcement would later refer to this delay as a serious setback. It wasn't until January 6, 1997, 11 days after JonBenét was discovered, that Burke was officially interviewed. That first interview took place under tightly controlled conditions with family lawyers present. During this interview, Burke stuck to a single story. He had been asleep the entire night and claimed not to have heard anything. His answers were described as short and emotionally flat. More than a year later, in June 1998, Burke was interviewed again as part of the grand jury proceedings. Observers of the videotaped interview noted his unusual emotional detachment throughout. Even when shown photographs from the scene, including the room where JonBenét was found, he reportedly did not flinch or express sadness. He also avoided direct answers to key questions about his activities on the night of the incident. The lack of emotional expression was noted by many. Experts in child psychology commented on how uncommon it was for a child to speak so dispassionately about the tragic passing of a sibling. There were no reported tears, confusion, or evident grief, just calm, measured responses. At the same time, the family arranged for Burke to begin sessions with Dr. Suzanne Bernhard, a licensed clinical psychologist. These meetings began in January 1997, shortly after the first police interview. They were not conducted as part of a criminal investigation, but as private psychological counseling. However, Dr. Bernhard's observations would later raise new questions. According to her assessments, Burke showed signs of emotional blunting. He was emotionally flat, in her words. She reported that he didn't cry when speaking about his sister and showed no visible signs of sadness, describing the events of that morning as if they had happened to someone else. In one session, Burke was asked to draw a map of the house. He did so in remarkable detail, even including the wine cellar in the basement, the very room where JonBenét was discovered. This was noteworthy because the family had claimed Burke had not been in that room before. Even more striking was Burke's response to a question about the meaning of the event. When asked what it meant that JonBenét had passed away, Burke said simply, "If someone's dead, you bury them. That's what you do." The matter-of-fact tone was noted by the professionals in the room and was interpreted by some as a sign of emotional distancing. Throughout multiple sessions, Burke consistently refused to talk about the morning of December 26th, stating each time, "I was asleep." He offered no elaboration and did not ask questions about his sister's passing. That absence of curiosity, especially from a child, was considered highly unusual. Dr. Bernhard wasn't the only one who noticed this emotional disconnect. In internal police notes and investigator memoirs, Burke's psychological profile was often referenced as controlled and guarded. While it's possible that Burke's calmness was a coping mechanism, professionals found the consistency of his emotional detachment to be a cause for concern. In hindsight, the interviews Burke gave have become one of the most scrutinized elements of the case, not because of major contradictions, but because he said so little and showed no outward signs of emotional distress. No charges were ever filed against Burke Ramsey. He maintained the same story across all interviews. He was asleep. In September 2016, nearly 20 years after the incident involving his younger sister, Burke Ramsey broke his long-held silence. He agreed to speak publicly in a multi-part interview on the Dr. Phil show. His stated reason for coming forward was simple. He wanted people to know his perspective. He denied any involvement in the incident and insisted that he had spent the entire night sleeping. Throughout the interview, Burke frequently smiled, even while describing difficult events. When Dr. Phil directly addressed it, Burke explained that he was nervous. Dr. Phil himself later suggested that Burke might have social anxiety, which could explain his unusual facial expressions. When Dr. Phil asked directly if he was the party responsible for the incident, Burke replied without hesitation, "Nope." He also denied ever engaging in forceful or aggressive actions toward JonBenét, and reiterated that he never heard anything unusual on the night of the incident, not the 911 call or any commotion. Still, many viewers found Burke's demeanor puzzling. Analysts noted that his emotional reactions appeared disconnected from the gravity of the subject. This dissonance sparked a wave of public reaction. While some viewers saw a shy man struggling to express himself, others saw signs of emotional detachment. The timing of the interview was also noted. It aired around the same time CBS released a documentary, which included a segment hypothesizing that a potential altercation occurred between the siblings and that the parents may have staged the scene to protect him. The Dr. Phil interview appeared to many as a public relations effort designed to counter that narrative. Dr. Phil later confirmed that Burke's legal team had oversight of the interview process. He defended the interview's integrity, stating publicly that he believed Burke was telling the truth and saw signs of long-term anxiety rather than deception. Within months, the Ramsey family filed a major defamation lawsuit against CBS, arguing the documentary falsely presented theories about Burke's involvement. The case was eventually settled out of court under confidential terms. Critics also noted that Burke never expressed curiosity about the individual responsible for the crime. This lack of engagement, some psychologists argued, could indicate trauma-induced emotional suppression, while others pointed to it as a point of concern. The controlled nature of Burke's media debut and his unusual affect during the interview all fueled more questions than answers. Further theories have been proposed that stretch beyond a simple altercation. One is known as the playing doctor theory. This theory did not originate from official police records, but emerged from public speculation and the work of independent investigators, most notably James Kohler. In his book, Foreign Faction, Kohler suggested that certain behavioral and forensic clues might point toward an inappropriate interaction between the two children, centering not on malicious intent, but on a boundary-crossing act of curiosity. Some forensic reports and independent analyses noted medical findings that remain subject to debate. Experts have theorized that these marks could have been caused by a small object. It is essential to note that no one in law enforcement ever formally accused Burke of any form of inappropriate contact. The context of these findings led to the question of whether they were the result of a curiosity-driven interaction with an unintended outcome. The circumstances implied someone may have tried to cover up an event that was inappropriate. There is also troubling context from Burke's past behavior. According to housekeepers and some investigative reports, Burke had a history of engaging in scatological behavior involving JonBenét's possessions and bedroom walls. While concerning, such actions could reflect deeper emotional disturbances, such as jealousy, a need for control, or unresolved sibling rivalry. This background adds weight to the theory that something may have occurred between the two children that night, which crossed personal boundaries. One of the strongest circumstantial links between Burke and JonBenét that night was a bowl of pineapple found on the kitchen table. Burke's fingerprints were on it, and forensic analysis confirmed that JonBenét had partially digested pineapple in her system, meaning she had eaten it not long before the critical incident. The working theory is that the two were together in the kitchen late at night. What started as a snack may have led to a disagreement. If this escalated, it could have triggered panic, especially if JonBenét protested or cried out. From that moment, a forceful action may have occurred out of frustration or fear. Again, this remains a theory, but it is one interpretation of the available behavioral and forensic patterns. Medical examiners noted that the medical findings that remained subject to debate were fresh. That detail made many experts question whether the findings came from an adult perpetrator. They believed it was more likely that they were caused by a smaller, less forceful object. The absence of DNA from an unknown source also weakened the theory of an outside intruder. Meanwhile, the detailed cleaning of the area is seen as particularly suspicious, as if someone in the house tried to erase evidence of something inappropriate. When interviewed, Burke consistently avoided discussing the night of December 25th, often steering conversations toward unrelated topics. When asked about the basement where JonBenét was discovered, he denied going there, even though he later sketched it accurately during a psychological session, including the layout of the wine cellar room where she was discovered. Such contradictions added to suspicions. To be clear, this theory remains speculative. No witness ever testified to such an interaction, no physical evidence definitively proves it, and no confession has ever emerged. Still, when considering the medical findings, the cleaning of evidence, the past boundary violations, and the pronounced emotional detachment Burke showed, it is understandable why this theory has persisted. Another theory stands apart, not for suggesting Burke was responsible, but for painting him as a victim. This theory suggests that Burke may have been subject to a highly controlled, repressive environment that shaped his responses. While there is no conclusive proof, the collection of behavioral and circumstantial clues has led many experts to consider that Burke may have been affected by long-standing patterns of family dysfunction and emotional suppression. One of the earliest observations was his emotional inconsistency. During interviews, Burke often smiled or appeared relaxed, even when recalling difficult details. Many child psychologists interpret this as a sign of emotional detachment, often seen in children who have experienced trauma. When speaking about JonBenét, he once described her as the one who always messes with my stuff, a cold and distant characterization. Such consistent topic redirection and flat affect led experts to believe he may have been trained to repress difficult emotions. Prior to the incident, Burke had reportedly engaged in behavior that crossed normal boundaries. Most notably, the scatological incidents involving JonBenét's possessions. Some psychologists argue this behavior could be a symptom of a child replicating what they had experienced. Children who have had their own personal space violated may act out those experiences onto others. Multiple psychologists who reviewed Burke's interviews noted that his descriptions of events lacked emotional engagement. This type of dissociation is common among individuals who have developed coping mechanisms to deal with unresolved emotional pain. Following JonBenét's passing, Burke was immediately separated from the scene and shielded from law enforcement by his parents and legal team. No independent psychological support was recorded during the critical first days. Instead, every contact Burke had was filtered through his parents and their attorneys. This level of control extended for years. The tight, unyielding grip the Ramseys had over Burke's exposure has been interpreted by many as protective, but questions remain about what exactly they were protecting him from. Equally striking was the absence of visible parental comfort given to Burke. No records, interviews, or photographs from the time showed his parents holding or comforting their only surviving child. Some experts believe this could indicate that Burke's emotional needs were consistently minimized. While no official source has ever labeled Burke a victim of abuse, some forensic psychologists have proposed that he showed traits consistent with children raised in highly repressive households. The Ramsey family's commitment to a polished public image is well documented. Patsy Ramsey, a former beauty queen, was known for presenting a picture-perfect family life. This type of environment often fosters a culture where difficult topics are hidden to maintain a clean public appearance. This internalization of silence may have taught Burke to bury his own pain. The Ramsey family has a well-documented history of litigating aggressively against any media that presents Burke in a negative light, including a major lawsuit against CBS. Even when Burke finally appeared on the Dr. Phil show, the interview was heavily controlled. While there is no direct evidence to confirm this theory, a significant body of circumstantial observations has kept it alive. The idea that Burke too suffered in silence remains a haunting layer in this complex, unsolved case. From the earliest days, Burke Ramsey has never been officially charged or named as a suspect. Yet, in the court of public opinion, he has remained at the center of suspicion. That suspicion was built by three key forces: investigative gaps, media focus, and a public seeking resolution. Burke was not questioned on the day his sister was discovered. The one child in the house during the time of the incident was never cross-examined under normal protocol. That silence left a gap, and the public filled it with theories. For the media, Burke became a quiet, reserved figure in the shadows of a media storm. His 2016 interview, meant to clear his name, only added to the debate, as analysts intensely scrutinized every nonverbal cue. The public expects children who experience the loss of a sibling to be visibly devastated, but Burke's observed behavior did not match this expectation. Whether this was a defense mechanism or something else, it clashed with what the world expected. The result was a convergence of factors. A child whose behavior was perceived as unusual, parents who controlled access to him, and a media environment focused on finding a central figure. The JonBenét Ramsey case stands as a prominent example of how tragedy, media, and public suspicion can intertwine. It showed what happens when an investigation is compromised at the very beginning. The scene wasn't secured, and key evidence was disturbed. We also learned how damaging public speculation can be. Burke Ramsey, only 9 years old, became a figure of public suspicion for decades. Not because of direct evidence, but because of how he acted and what he did or did not say. Most importantly, the case taught us to look deeper at how we handle child trauma. In the end, the JonBenét case is a reminder that justice isn't just about identifying the responsible party. It's about protecting the innocent, honoring the memory of the deceased with factual clarity, and resisting the urge to sensationalize a tragedy. Thanks for watching. How do you feel about these arguments and theories? Does it give you a different perspective on the case? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to receive the latest notifications.